Hi! It's time for our next bit of the Twits, isn't it? I wonder what's going to have been happening to them. Do you know what I'm thinking though? Here we go for lockdown, and I can see Mr. Schumm's hair is going to get very bushy again, isn't it? So did you try any of that spaghetti? Have you tried any of that spaghetti? Have you sent me any pictures yet? Can't wait to see your pictures. The funny walking stick. Mm. What's he going to do to her walking stick? To pay Mrs. Twit back for the worms in his spaghetti, Mr. Twit thought up a really nasty, clever trick. One night, when the old woman was asleep, he crept out of bed, took her walking stick downstairs to the workshed. There he stuck a tiny round piece of wood, no thicker than a penny, onto the bottom of the stick. This made the stick longer, but the difference was so small, the next morning Mrs. Twit didn't notice it, couldn't see that it was taller. The following night, Mr. Twit stuck another tiny piece of wood on the walking stick. Every night he crept downstairs and added an extra tiny thickness of wood to the end of the walking stick. He did it very neatly so that the extra bits looked like part of the old stick, so she didn't even notice. Gradually, but oh so gradually, Mrs. Twit's walking stick was getting longer and longer and longer. Now, when something is growing very slowly, it is almost impossible to notice it happening. You yourself, for example, are actually growing taller and taller and taller every day that goes by, but you wouldn't think it, would you? No, you wouldn't actually. You wouldn't think that. It's happening so slowly you can't even notice it from one week to the next. It was the same with Mrs. Twit's walking stick. It was all so slow and gradual that she didn't notice how long it was getting, even when it was halfway up to her shoulder. "That stick's too long for you," Mr. Twit said to her one day. "Why is it?" "Why, yes, oh, so it is," Mrs. Twit said, looking at the stick. "I've had a feeling there was something wrong, but couldn't for the life of me think what it was." "There's something wrong, all right," said Mr. Twit, beginning to enjoy himself. "Whatever can have happened?" Mrs. Twit said, staring at the old walking stick. "It must suddenly have grown longer." "Don't be a fool," Mr. Twit said. "How can a walking stick possibly grow longer? It's made of wood, isn't it? Dead wood can't grow." "Then what on earth can have happened?" cried Mrs. Twit. "It's not the stick, it's you," said Mr. Twit, grinning horribly. That's my best horrible grin. "That's not true. I've been noticing that you're getting shorter. I've been noticing it for some time." No, that's not true," cried Mrs. Twit. "You're a shrinking woman," said Mr. Twit. "It's not possible," cried Mrs. Twit. "Oh, yes, it jolly well is," said Mr. Twit. "You're shrinking fast. You're shrinking dangerously fast. Why, you must have shrunk at least a foot in the last few days." "Never!" she cried. "Of course you have. Take a look at your stick, you old goat, and see how much you've shrunk in comparison. You've got the shrinks. That's what you've got. You've got the dreaded shrinks." Mrs. Twit began to feel so trembly she had to sit down. There she is, and look at how long her walking stick is. Mrs. Twit has the shrinks. As soon as Mr. Twit, or Mrs. Twit even, sat down, Mr. Twit pointed at her and shouted, "There you are! You're sitting on your old chair, and you've shrunk so much your feet aren't even touching the ground." Mrs. Twit looked down at her feet, and by golly, the man was right. Her feet were not touching the ground. Mr. Twit, you see, had been just as clever with the chair as he had with the walking stick. So every night he'd been putting a little bit of wood underneath each leg of the chair, so the chair was getting bigger and bigger. He'd done the same to the four legs of Mrs. Twit's chair. "Just look at you sitting there in your old chair," he cried, "and you've shrunk so much your feet are dangling in the air." Mrs. Twit went white with fear. "Oh, you've got the shrinks! You've got the shrinks!" cried Mr. Twit, pointing his finger at her like a pistol. "You've got them badly. You've got the most terrible case of the shrinks I've ever seen." Mrs. Twit became so frightened she began to dribble. "Yes, dribbling now, dribble, 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 dribble." But Mr. Twit, still remembering the worms in his spaghetti, didn't feel sorry for her at all. "I suppose you know what happens to you when you get the shrinks." "What?" gasped Mrs. Twit. "What happens?" "Your head shrinks into your neck, and your neck shrinks into your body, and your body shrinks into your legs, and your legs shrink into your feet, and in the end, there's nothing left except a pair of shoes and a bundle of old clothes." "I can't bear it," cried Mrs. Twit. "I can't bear it." "Oh, it's a terrible disease," said Mr. Twit. "The worst in the world." "How long have I got?" cried Mrs. Twit. "How long before I finish up as a bundle of clothes on the floor and just a pair of shoes?" Mr. Twit put on a very solemn face. "At the rate you're going," he said, shaking his head sadly, "I'd say no more than 10 or 11 days." "But isn't there anything we can do? Can't we try and stop it?" cried Mrs. Twit. "There's only one cure for the shrinks," said Mr. Twit. "Tell me," she cried. "Oh, tell me quickly." "We'll have to hurry," said Mr. Twit. "I'm ready. I'm ready. I'll hurry. I'll do anything you say," cried Mrs. Twit. Oh, look at her. Look at her sat on that chair. Oh. You won't last long if you don't hurry up," said Mr. Twit, giving her another grisly grin. He's a grisly grin. "What is it I must do?" cried Mrs. Twit, clutching her cheeks. "Well, there's only one thing for it. You've got to be stretched." Next episode is Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Can't wait for that. And now, what could you do? Could you do a picture of, draw a big chair and draw Mrs. Twit sitting in it so she looks really tiny? How do you think he's going to stretch her? What do you think he's going to do to try and make her stretch even more? Have a little think about it. See what you come up with. See if there's something you'd like to draw me a picture of, or you'd like to write me a story. Go on the computer and write me a story. Or I tell you what, write me a letter and post it to school. Write me a letter and pretend you're Mr. Twit. Yeah? Pretend you're Mr. Twit and tell me some of the tricks you'd like to play. Or pretend you're Mrs. Twit and tell me some of the tricks you'd like to play. That'd be really good. See if you can do that. Anyway, have a good day. Have a googly, jitty, tapestry day. Hope it all goes well. See you soon. Bye, 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 bye.